The ocean is patient. It hides secrets in its depths, keeps the bones of sailors, and silences the cries of battle. But even the ocean could not silence the determination of those who refused to surrender. By 1943, the Allies had sharpened their tools, their strategies, and their resolve. The U-boat menace that once seemed unstoppable was now being hunted in return. The convoys that sailed across the Atlantic no longer drifted helplessly through the dark. They moved like guarded fortresses, escorted by destroyers and corvettes, their guns bristling, their radars sweeping. Above them circled aircraft, carrying depth charges of their own, ready to rain destruction on submarines daring to surface. The tools of war were no longer scattered attempts. They had become a coordinated symphony, each piece working together to shield the lifeline of freedom. Among these guardians of the sea were men whose stories rarely reached the front page. Black sailors served in segregated crews, often confined to the hardest labor. But in the Atlantic's fury, titles and ranks meant little. When fire engulfed the deck, when water poured into shattered steel, survival depended not on color, but on courage. Again and again, black sailors proved their mettle, hauling ammunition through smoke, dragging wounded men to safety, keeping engines alive when every second meant the difference between life and death. And yet, once the flames were extinguished, once the ocean calmed, the old walls of prejudice reappeared. Recognition was withheld. Medals were delayed. Names were left out of the official accounts. But the ocean knew, the men who survived knew, and history, when told with honesty, must also know. The fourth tool in this deadly hunt was a long-range aircraft, a weapon that stretched the Allies' reach far beyond the horizon. Before, U-boats could roam freely in the mid-Atlantic gap, a stretch of ocean too far for planes to patrol. Their convoys were vulnerable, stalked without mercy. But when aircraft carriers brought planes into the fight, and when long-range patrol bombers finally bridged the gap, the hunters became the hunted. From the sky, black pilots and crew members, like those of the Tuskegee Airmen, though they are remembered more for their combat in Europe, proved their worth, scanning the waves, braving storms, striking at shadows beneath the sea. They too fought two wars, one against Hitler and one against the blindness of their own homeland. With these tools, depth charges, hedgehogs, sonar and radar, and the eyes of aircraft, the tide began to turn. Convoys that once feared annihilation now struck back with precision. U-boats that rose to fire their torpedoes found the sky filled with aircraft and the sea alive with destroyers. For every ship they tried to sink, the price grew higher. Slowly, painfully, the noose tightened. But victory was never easy. The sea demanded sacrifice. Every U-boat sunk often meant Allied lives already lost. Sailors froze in lifeboats. Oil clung to their skin. Salt water burned their wounds. Survivors carried the memory of shipmates swallowed by the Atlantic, their last cries drowned by the waves. For black sailors, those memories were compounded by another grief: to come home to a land where their service might still be met with silence. And yet, in that silence there was pride. Pride in having stood watch on storm-tossed nights when sonar pings echoed through the hull. Pride in loading the depth charges that struck the predators below. Pride in keeping the engines roaring, the ships moving, the convoys alive. Pride in knowing that, even if their names were not written in bold print, their fingerprints were pressed into history. The Battle of the Atlantic was not just a clash of weapons. It was a test of endurance, of unity, of whether freedom's lifeline could survive the storm. The Allies' victory did not come from one weapon alone, but from the blending of many, tools forged by human hands, sharpened by innovation, and wielded with courage. It was the strength of destroyer crews braving the roar of depth charges. It was a persistence of airmen scanning endless seas. It was a determination of factory workers, men and women, black and white, pouring steel, riveting ships, refusing to let despair break them. In those years, the ocean became a mirror of society itself. It showed the cruelty of discrimination, but also revealed the truth. When survival is at stake, when the enemy closes in, when justice itself hangs in the balance, we are bound together. The U-boats could not divide the courage of men who stood shoulder to shoulder, even if their own nations tried to separate them. When the war finally turned, when the U-boat fleet lay shattered and the Atlantic breathed easier, the world celebrated. But the deeper story lingered. For many black veterans, the fight for dignity continued long after the guns fell silent. They had risked everything, given everything, yet returned to face the same walls of exclusion. The tools that had hunted U-boats had saved the free world, but the tools to dismantle prejudice were still unfinished. And that is where this story speaks most clearly today. Because the courage shown on the Atlantic was not just about torpedoes and sonar. It was about resilience in the face of erasure. It was about dignity in the face of denial. It was about people who gave, even when the world refused to give back. The ocean remembers them. Every wave that rolls across the Atlantic carries the echoes of their footsteps on steel decks, the rhythm of their hammers in the shipyards, the prayers whispered in lifeboats under starlit skies. The ocean does not discriminate. It holds the bones of all who fell side by side, equal in sacrifice. And so, when we tell the story of how the Allies hunted German U-boats, we must tell it fully. We must remember the weapons, yes, the depth charges, the hedgehogs, the radar, the planes. But we must also remember the hands that built them, the sailors who manned them, the forgotten who stood watch in silence. To honor them is to honor truth. To honor them is to honor justice. The war against the U-boats ended. The war for equality did not. But in their courage lies a legacy, a reminder that even in the darkest waters, dignity shines brighter than fear, and that freedom once won must belong to all.